Bien, pues muchísimas gracias por permanecer en esta transmisión, en esta jornada, intensa jornada, interesante jornada del Foro Agua y Minería, y en nombre del Instituto Mexicano de Tecnología del Agua, integrante del sector ambiental encabezado por la Secretaría de Medio Ambiente y Recursos Naturales de México, pues estamos muy contentos de que sigan acompañándonos en este primer foro virtual de agua y minería en México, desafíos para una gestión integrada de agua y territorio. Y llega el momento entonces ya de presenciar la conferencia de cierre, después de varios paneles intensos de conferencias también magistrales inaugurales, y para la presentación de esta conferencia de cierre, de este primer foro virtual de la relación entre agua y minería, yo dejo en el uso de la palabra a Agustín Breña Naranjo. Él es el coordinador de hidrología del Instituto Mexicano de Tecnología del Agua. Agustín, ¿cómo estás? Muy buenas tardes. Tú tienes el uso de la palabra para presentar a nuestro conferencista magistral para la conferencia de cierre.
Okay, muchas gracias. Muy buenas tardes. Vamos a dar rienda a la última presentación de este foro, que también estamos cerrando este evento con una conferencia magistral por parte del doctor Neil McIntyre de la Universidad de Queensland en Australia, la cual será impartida en inglés, por lo cual voy a leer su reseña curricular en inglés. Thank you, Professor McIntyre, for being with us today. I will briefly read your CV, and then we will start with your lecture. Professor McIntyre is a full professor of water resources at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. He began his career as a civil engineer building wastewater infrastructure in Scotland, then moved to Imperial College London, where he achieved his master's and PhD on the topics of modeling surface water quality and hydrology. During his 15 years at Imperial College, his research focused on understanding the impacts of climate change and land use change on water supplies and flood risk. He then moved to the Sustainable Minerals Institute in Brisbane to focus on mine region research. His current projects investigate water resources in mining regions in Australia and South America. So the title of his book is about desalination of seawater as a potential solution for water scarcity for mining purposes. And I think it's a very timely talk because in Mexico, a lot of our mining projects are located in regions suffering water scarcity. So again, thank you very much, Neil, for willing to give us this talk, and I give you, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Agustín, and it's a great pleasure to be able to give this presentation, and thank you very much to your team at the Institute for helping me organize myself. I regret that we don't do any work in Mexico at the moment. However, I hope our experience and our knowledge of Chile is of interest and relevance to you. So that's what I'm going to focus on. Are you seeing my screen properly?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, good. Okay, so this is work I've done with my colleagues, both here in Brisbane and also in our office in Chile, focusing on understanding the evolution of seawater supply to mines in Chile and what challenges and what opportunities that represents for the future, both in Chile and in other regions. So what has happened in Chile over the last 8 years or so is quite remarkable. There's been around about $7 billion of investment in seawater supplies to mines, and some of these mines being almost 3,000 meters up into the Andes. And so far, this has been in the arid north of Chile, and the Escondida plant is the largest example. But progressively, it's moving further south, and recently there's even been talk of supplying seawater to Los Bronces mine which is in central Chile, quite near to the capital, Santiago. So this is really astounding that there is a case for pumping water so far inland and so far up into the mountains. So my presentation, I'm going to try and help us understand why this is happening and what are the challenges and opportunities. So I've got 3 parts to my presentation. I've got about 25 slides to cover, and I'll certainly do that within half an hour. So first of all, I'm just going to give a bit of context, which may repeat what you've heard earlier in the forum, so I'll go through it quite quickly. Okay, so first of all, global water scarcity. So this is a map showing some of the highly stressed areas of the world, and there's been numerous attempts to overlay such maps with where the big mines are in the world, which consistently shows that many of the mines in the world, the big mines, are in highly water stressed areas. Now, one of the best maps of this nature has very recently come out. It was published by the World Wildlife Fund, which I've copied here. And this is a map basically showing their water risk index and the color scale, and then superimposed on top of that are the major mines in the world. So they've identified 10 clusters of mines in the world, which are outlined, which represent high risk areas. And you see that you know, one of these is in Chile, one's in Peru, and one is in Mexico. Now the Chile one is dominated by water scarcity risks. The Mexico one's more interesting because their methodology disaggregates risks into 7 types of risk, 7 types of water risk. And Mexico is actually quite interesting in the variety of water risks that exist. So this is another chart from that same report. So it just shows some of the countries with the most water risk for mining, Mexico being one of them. Now, of relevance to our discussion today is not really, not so much water quality status and flooding, but it's the water scarcity, reputational water risk, and regulatory water risks that are really driving the investment in seawater supplies. And you can see that Mexico is rated as being significantly at risk from each of these relevant risk factors. Another thing to note with this is, of course, these are nationally aggregated risk metrics. It's been shown time and again that, you know, really to understand the situation for individual mines, you need to look at the basin that mine is situated in. Just a bit on the economics, because of course seawater supply is expensive, and so it's interesting to look at, you know, what is the economic case for it. Now, in Australia, like in many other mining countries, mining coexists with agriculture. And it's almost always the case that agriculture uses 1 or 2 or even 3 orders of magnitude more water than mining does. And the mining industry is quick to point out that per unit water consumption, the mining industry contributes much more to national economies than the agricultural industry does. Now, there's lots of things to argue about these comparisons, but the point here isn't to get into that argument. The point is just to illustrate that, you know, indeed mining does contribute a lot economically and make significant profits for each unit of water it uses. And that's just expanded on a little bit in this next slide, which is kind of old now because it stops in 2014 to 2015. But it shows that when commodity prices are high, such as 2010 to 2011, the mining industry makes high profits. But then it goes through periods making very low or 0 profits when commodity prices are low. And in fact, commodity prices reached their real low in 2016. So actually the profit levels dropped significantly beyond the end of this graph. The values in red there are just my own rough approximations of the profits being made per meter cubed of water being consumed. So you can see in the good times, it was $150, this is Australian dollars, per meter cubed in Australia. And therefore, an investment of $5 per meter cubed in desalinated water, which is a typical value for a high altitude mine, is very minimal compared to the profits that are being made. However, when the mining industry goes through the tough times, that's a very significant amount of their profits. So it's not by no means a very straightforward decision financially. It relies on assumptions about continuing strength of the industry. This is just a figure that one of my PhD students produced, which is very nice because it shows water trading data and how much consumers are willing to pay for 1 litre per second long-term rights to water, and consistently see in mining regions that value is much, much higher. And in the main mining region of Chile, which is Antofagasta, that value is up at $700,000 US per litre per second, which is astounding investment. That when you do the calculations, it's actually quite a sensible investment when you look at what it means in terms of productivity of the commodities and associated revenues. Now on to hydrology, which is another important driver of seawater supplies. Mining requires a reliable supply of water. It's not very adaptable. Other water consumers, such as cities and agriculture, have become quite adaptable in most cases and are able to substantially reduce their water demands in times of drought. The mining industry is different for various reasons, and it has not, or perhaps cannot, become so adaptable. And that means that it has to be very risk averse in terms of droughts. The graph shown here is just a study we did in Chile of one of the mines that relies heavily on precipitation and snowmelt. And we looked at scenarios of future hydrology, and there's only about 1 in every 30 years when the mine is predicted to be short of water. Nevertheless, that 1 in 30 years is extremely important in terms of investments to cover the risk of water shortage. And the solution was determined to be a large investment in recirculating water from the tailings dam, just to avoid the high exposure to the hydrological risks. This is just another study we did looking at the activity of mining in water markets in Chile, which is very interesting because it shows that mining is very reluctant to become involved in water markets. This data here, so in the first column, the gray column there with numbers, shows the number of transactions from the different water consumers. And even though mining is one of the major water consumers in this region, it has the least transactions, especially selling. And that's for the reason I've just covered, that they, even if they hold excess water rights, they hold on to them because of future uncertainty about supply and demand. So they're very unwilling to sell their water rights, and they're also unwilling to buy. And I guess that's because of reputational issues. They don't like to be seen to be dominating the water markets. And when they do buy, they're prepared to pay very high prices. So reluctance to become involved in water markets is another driver of investment in seawater supply. Social license, you've heard about a number of times previously in the forum, which is another extremely important driver. It's relevant here in Sydney, in Australia, in particular around the Sydney region. It's a major issue. And of course, in Latin America, there's numerous cases where disputes and conflicts over water have significantly delayed or even cancelled mining projects. So on to looking at the experience in Chile. So first of all, the freshwater situation in Chile. Chile is very interesting hydrologically in the south. have an abundance of fresh water. However, that decreases towards the north, and by the time you get to the main mining regions in the Atacama Desert, the demand for water is much, much higher than the available freshwater supply. So you see the region of Antofagasta, which is the main mining region, a very high demand for water, very little sustainable water resources. And that's just because the precipitation rates less than 50 millimeters per year, and almost zero runoff and almost zero recharge of the aquifers. So a very, very water stressed region. And you see that extends not just Antofagasta, but it extends right down to Valparaiso to a lesser extent. And then further south, where there's an abundance of water, well, there's hardly any mining. So that's not of use. This is data produced by Cochilco, which is the Copper Mining Association in Chile, which just projects future mine water demands for the whole of Chile for the copper mining industry, which shows that demand for water is expected to continue to rise. Now, this isn't because the industry is inefficient. In the majority of cases, there's been major savings, major improvements of water efficiency over the last decade or so. This is because of, to some extent, increases of production, but also because of decreasing ore grades and therefore higher demands for water to obtain the same amount of commodity. And you see that increase in water demand is not an increase in freshwater demand. It's being absorbed by seawater. It's expected to be absorbed by seawater. And in fact, since this figure was produced, that is pretty much exactly the trend we've seen in the last 2 years. Just that this is the same data disaggregated spatially into the different regions. So you see again, Antofagasta increasingly reliant on seawater and is expected to become, seawater is expected to become the dominant source in the near future there. And increasingly use of seawater in the more southern regions at Atacama and Coquimbo. And as I showed it right at the start of the presentation, there's even talk of seawater supply to a mine in the Valparaiso region, the Los Bronces mine. So in Chile, there's 18 desal plants at the moment. 13 of them supply mines. The capacity in total is about 7.8 meters cubed per second. 83% of that for mining operations, and numerous projects in the planning phase as well. I'm going to focus a bit on the Antofagasta region because that's what we've been looking into most closely to try and understand this situation. So several of the mining companies have invested in desalination, and that includes the large Escondida mine, where the largest investment has been made. So 10 desalination plants operational and 8 underway either in planning or construction phase, more than 2,000 kilometers of pipeline, traveling up to 180 kilometers and to an altitude of 3,000 meters. And that's the relevance of the $5 per meter cubed, because approximate calculations show that's the approximate cost of pumping water to that altitude, including operational and capital costs. Now, if you look at in blue there on the map is showing the existing desal plant locations and the associated pipelines. And you can see, especially in the northern part, it's a bit of a mess because there's various desal plants and pipelines which are going more or less the same route, and in some cases even cross over each other. And this is because there's been there's been very little integrated planning. These projects have all been individual projects without any requirement for coordination with other projects. So mining companies have not been interested in thinking about sharing water supplies with other users and with other mines because of their, I guess because they want to be in control of their own risks and not introduce any new risks by having partners on the project. So this situation of an uncoordinated system of seawater supplies is what's driven some of our research with the question of, what are the opportunities here for having a more networked system, opportunities to reduce costs, opportunities to use existing pipelines to supply other users of water and mines that are not yet supplied with seawater. So my colleagues in Chile led a project that was funded by Consejo Minero in Chile, just asking this question, what would be the benefits and challenges of taking the existing pipelines in Antofagasta and creating some kind of network? So in the map there, you see the existing pipelines, some of the existing pipelines in red and orange, and then the hypothetical connections in green and blue. So the different colors there represent some of the different scenarios of connections that we looked at. Now there is a report of this which is online, and it goes into all the details of the context of this and the methodology and the data that was used. I'm just going to jump to one of the results that was an output of this. So this graph shows the additional cost of creating these networks, looking at different scenarios of increases in future water demands out to 2041, and scenarios of decreases in freshwater or continental use of water by the mines. And essentially what it shows under the baseline scenario, where water demands go up as projected, and companies still use their existing freshwater rights, that there simply wouldn't be a financial case for this network. It would be prohibitively expensive. So you see that blue line at the top, around about $20 US per meter cubed. However, if the demands are more than expected, the increased demands, and more importantly, if the industry decides to pull out of using freshwater altogether, in other words, to relinquish its rights and rely completely on seawater, then increasingly there becomes a case for having an integrated network rather than an uncoordinated, every mine for itself approach. And so that's represented by the black line there, which you see goes down to this, this magical value of $5 US per meter cubed. And indeed would be, the cost would be less than that if you assumed 100% decrease in freshwater rights use, as opposed to the 50% assumed in that case. So there's lots of interesting results in that report that you can look at if you're interested in this concept. Now, just a couple of slides now looking at risks of seawater supply. So this is just a bit of work we did looking at financial risks. The first graph there is I've taken from Fernando Concha's paper. Fernando works at University of Concepcion in Chile, where him and his team did an analysis of costs under different seawater treatment technologies, and also split it up into the CapEx and the OpEx, and then plotted that over different elevations of the mine. And so you see there, $5 US per meter cubed corresponds to around about 3,000 meters above sea level. Now, in terms of the risks, as I said before, $5 per meter cubed is not much relative to the profits and revenues of large mines under high commodity prices. But it's interesting, if you look at projections of commodity prices by experts, which is in that right-hand graph at the top, in general, the projections are optimistic. So in general, the experts predict a continual increase in copper prices over the next 25 to 30 years, which really supports the case for a large-scale investment in seawater supplies. However, interestingly, the experts' projections, the same experts gave different projections the next year, that's the red lines, where they were less optimistic about future copper prices. So there is some significant risk there, depends on how optimistic you are about future copper prices. Another major factor is energy prices, of course. Now in Chile, energy prices were amongst the highest in the world 10 years ago for various reasons, including a better energy supply network and also low-cost solar power. They have come down substantially and are projected under optimistic scenarios to continue going down over the next 30 years or so. But are overall, on average, are expected to be round about stable. So again, there's some sensitivity to projections in energy prices, but also a lot of optimism because of the increased prospects of low-cost solar power to support the energy costs. Also of interest are the more social sides of the risks. So, I mean, there's obvious opportunities for communities to benefit from mines investment in seawater supply, which we're already seeing at certain mines, and you can read about Escondida mines' plans for dropping all their reliance on freshwater and totally rely on seawater. And what that means is, in principle, they would be free to give all their freshwater rights to communities and other water users. What has happened in Antofagasta up till now is more that mining companies, if they have invested in seawater and find themselves with excess water rights, they tend to sell to other mining companies, which has little benefit for communities, but little direct benefit anyway. But well, there's an obvious opportunity there, which is being pursued by some companies now. However, there are risks, of course, that if communities observe that mining companies have a new and abundant supply of water, and yet they are still short for their own purposes, that there will be increasing expectations on the companies to share their water. And of course, the communities won't be able to afford the true costs of that supply, and therefore it would essentially be a subsidy. And there's various environmental risks as well that there's a significant amount of literature about now. The coastal damage and the impacts on coastal ecology associated with construction and operation of the desal plants, and also the footprint of the energy generation plants. Okay, so on to the final part of my presentation, talking a bit about opportunities of this. So the first one is integrated water supply systems. So I talked about the Antofagasta case, where we looked at extending existing pipelines into a connected network, and that was only financially realistic under assumptions that of total reliance on seawater by all of the mines. However, if you look further south in Chile into Atacama and Coquimbo and Valparaiso, where the existing development of seawater supply projects is at a much earlier stage. So there's much more scope in those regions to properly plan an integrated network with optimal sharing and optimal routes. And optimal integration of seawater supply with other sources of water. So this is something that we're going to be looking at in detail over the next 3 years with a case study in the Atacama region. So here's the Atacama region, showing some of the mines there, and some of the desal locations of the existing desal plants, and some of the other relevant information. Now you can read on the websites that there is a project called ENAPAC, which is an entrepreneurial project really, where people have realized that there is major opportunities from having an integrated, centralized system of seawater supplies combined with other types of water supplies. So there is a proposal for a central reservoir shown in green there, and a distribution network from that central reservoir to supply various mines and other users. So that's a very exciting development, but raises some interesting scientific questions about how to quantify the real costs and benefits of that, which is what we're going to be looking at in the future. So finally, just going back to Mexico, now I'm not familiar with mining in Mexico, I'm afraid, and so I'm going to have to leave it to you people and others to consider the relevance of all this to Mexico. But Mexico, while most of the mines seem to be on the plateau and at distances and elevations from the coast that would make seawater supply preclusively expensive, there are a significant number in water-scarce regions which are within this round about 150 kilometers from the coast that Chile's experience shows to be quite feasible in terms of seawater supplies. But if there is consideration of this by mines and by governments who regulate the mines, our experience from Chile is to urge an integration process that avoids piecemeal development by individual mines. Thank you very much. That's the end.
Thank you very much, Neil, for this interesting presentation. We have a couple of questions. I will start with the first one from Álvaro Paredes. He's asking, how do the costs of water compare between the different mining clusters we identify, particularly between Chile, Peru, and Mexico?
Yeah, that's interesting. Unfortunately, I don't have any data on the costs of water supply between the different regions. The costs become increasingly dominated by energy costs the further from the coast and the higher elevation you get. And so if you're talking about high elevation mines, the costs are going to be pretty proportional to energy costs. Another interesting point on that is, so the typical cost for a high elevation mine in Chile is maybe $5 per meter cubed. Compared to traditional freshwater supplies that don't need any pre-treatment, their cost is minimal. I mean, maybe certainly less than $0.5 per meter cubed. So even though I say that, that value of $5 per meter cubed should be feasible, at least in the good times, it is a major investment compared to what the companies have been spending on water.
Okay, thank you. Another question is about the cost of a cubic meter of mine water and a cubic meter of desalinated seawater. I guess it's in Chile.
Yeah, that's a good question. So there have been some studies by my colleagues in Chile comparing the costs of seawater supply with other technologies for reducing water demand. So filter pressing of tailings to recover water from tailings is another technology. And I think I think when you do get beyond round about 3,000 meters in elevation, then these other technologies for recovering more and more water become more attractive than increasing the supply of water. So there is another dimension to this, which I haven't talked about, which is the potential investments in recovering more water from the mine wastes. But as I said, mines in Chile, the big mines in Chile have made a lot of progress in investing in water efficiency and recovering water. And so despite that, many of them are still turning to seawater supplies. So I can't answer that question properly, I'm afraid, Agustín, but there is some literature out there which compares the costs of different technologies.
Okay, that's fine, thank you. And I was also wondering if there's, have you, or the people in Chile, the companies, the mining companies have considered desalinating brackish water? I mean, is there brackish water in the region, or there's no like any groundwater source in the continental part of Chile? So, I mean, like, is seawater desalination the only option, or can you also desalinate brackish water, which I guess is less expensive?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the mines do rely, many of the mines rely heavily on groundwater rights. So there are aquifers which they pump water from. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think in some cases they'll have to pre-treat that water because of quality issues. If they, I think there's a constraint of water rights, so they could explore for more brackish water, perhaps in deeper, older aquifers. But I think they are constrained that most of these regions, there's no more rights. You know, you can't take any more groundwater than you already are, simply because there's no rights to do that.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Antonio Suarez from the Ministry of Economy is asking about the social concerns about the environmental impacts of desalination, like the byproduct of removing or separating salt from seawater. Is there any examples in Chile?
That has been a serious issue in Chile. I believe that major concerns about the impacts of brine discharge and discharge of other chemicals associated with desal plants on fisheries, on tourism, and the ecology. So I think that is a major challenge for the companies who want to construct these plants. And I believe they have had to make significant concessions to communities who have been affected. But I think it's I think one of the issues in Chile is that there is some that the water legislation there doesn't fully cover desalinated water supplies. So I think as well as the issue of potential dealing with potential objections to these developments, that any country who's following this path of major investment in desalinated water supplies would have to have another look at the legislation, the process by which these conflicts would be resolved.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Neil, for this interesting presentation. It's a very, I mean, so far in Mexico, we haven't faced any type of projects like this. Although we like in Chile, we also have a similar problem of water scarcity. And again, well, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Yeah, have a good day, good morning in Australia.
Thank you, Agustín.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Muchas gracias, Dr. Neil McIntyre. Thank you very much for your presentation. Muchas gracias, Agustín Breña, también por la moderación esta conferencia. De verdad que nos deja también pues mucho más profundidad en el conocimiento de las alternativas tecnológicas, de todo lo que hemos venido compartiendo a lo largo de esta jornada. Muchísimas gracias, una forma inmejorable de terminar con la parte técnica de este primer foro sobre agua y minería. Y para concluir y para ir cerrando ya este evento que ha sido una jornada intensa, pero muy interesante a lo largo de todo el día, yo quiero dejar en uso la palabra para hacer el cierre de este foro a la maestra Norma Ramírez. Ella es coordinadora de tratamiento y calidad del agua del Instituto Mexicano de Tecnología del Agua, a quien le pedimos atentamente pues nos comparta un comentario para el cierre de este primer foro virtual sobre agua y minería. Norma, ¿cómo estás? Muy buenas tardes, noches en algunas partes ya del país.
Bueno, muy buena tarde a todos. Es un gusto poder compartir algunas reflexiones con todos ustedes. Y bueno, en primer lugar, quisiera agradecer la valiosa participación de la Secretaria del Medio Ambiente y Recursos Naturales, María Luisa Albores González, que nos honró dirigiendo un mensaje de bienvenida, y además a todos y cada uno de ustedes que han permanecido a lo largo del día, disfrutando y de todo lo que fueron todas estas presentaciones, compartiendo comentarios, haciendo preguntas, ¿no? Y esta participación, bueno, en este primer foro virtual de agua y minería en México, desafíos para una gestión integrada de agua y territorio, organizado por el Instituto Mexicano de Tecnología del Agua, el cual tuvo como objetivo realizar un análisis de la actividad minera y sus impactos al medio ambiente, en especial al recurso hídrico, que como instituto es nuestra materia de atención y responsabilidad, desde el punto de vista de la ciencia y la tecnología, para poder contribuir a solucionar los problemas que tenemos en nuestro país con respecto a este vital líquido, y en especial cuando este se vincula con la actividad minera, en la cual, como escuchamos a lo largo de las presentaciones y discusiones, existen varios desafíos que tenemos que enfrentar y sobre todo resolver, para poder así armonizar el desarrollo económico, que no se degrade el ambiente y que exista una repartición equitativa de los beneficios entre los pobladores de una zona o región. En el foro tuvimos 2 conferencias magistrales, excelentes, y 4 mesas de trabajo con ponencias que permitieron entablar una muy rica discusión, por momentos muy intensas, que nos proporcionan una gran cantidad de material para continuar buscando armonizar esta contradictoria relación de agua y minería en nuestro país. De manera muy breve haré algunos comentarios acerca de cada una de las mesas. Con respecto a la mesa de Medio Ambiente, Agua y Minería, pues nos acompañó el subsecretario de Fomento y Normatividad Ambiental, Tonatiuh Herrera Gutiérrez, quien realizó una breve reseña de la minería en México, para resaltar que siempre ha existido una disputa por el agua en las zonas mineras y que a la fecha sigue habiendo una competencia entre diversos usos del agua. Sobre todo, esta situación se está dando y se da en el norte del país. Actualmente, la regulación minera se contrapone con la normatividad ambiental, sobre todo en cuanto a la relación agua y minería, en lo que tiene que ver con descargas de aguas residuales, cuando tenemos las presas de jales y el aprovechamiento de aguas con base en concesiones. Subrayó que ha pasado mucho tiempo sin que se actualice la legislación y que la Secretaría está trabajando en los procesos de evaluación de los proyectos mineros y la protección ambiental. Así también manifestó que es importante que las manifestaciones de impacto ambiental consideren los efectos inmediatos que se presentan por efecto del establecimiento de las minas. También nos acompañó José Jabalera, director general de Desarrollo Minero de la Secretaría de Economía, quien presentó las guías y protocolos para una minería responsable y que estas consideren el desarrollo de las comunidades, las contingencias sanitarias, mencionó que en este caso, como lo que es la enfermedad del COVID-19, también la seguridad industrial, el uso y manejo del agua, así como el manejo de presas de jales. En diálogo con la audiencia, habló sobre la información disponible de monitoreo y evaluación de la calidad del agua en las áreas circundantes y el impacto en los acuíferos. también estuvo con nosotros la directora de la región norte y Sierra Madre Occidental de la Comisión Nacional de Áreas Naturales Protegidas, María Elena Rodarte García, quien nos dio una explicación de las categorías que existen de protección de áreas naturales protegidas, así como un resumen de la reglamentación en la materia. En diálogo también con los participantes, abundó sobre la información disponible al público sobre en lo que se refiere a las autorizaciones otorgadas a explotaciones mineras en áreas naturales protegidas. Tema muy importante y de gran controversia, creo yo. Además, nos habló de los impactos ambientales negativos al agua y a los ecosistemas por la minería en estas áreas y las acciones de planificación y regulación del aprovechamiento del agua para prevenirlos o minimizarlos. Tuvimos también otra mesa muy interesante relacionada con el marco legal y administrativo de la relación agua y minería. En esta participaron Anaí Velasco del SEMDA, Rodrigo Gutiérrez Rivas del Instituto de Investigaciones Jurídicas de la UNAM, Manuel Llano Vázquez Prada de Cartocrítica, Alfredo David y Karen Flores de Caminex. Muy interesante, muy intensa cuando se dieron las preguntas, la interacción entre ellos y con la audiencia. Y de todo esto también hubo una buena noticia, la publicación de la NOM 120, Semarnat 2020, la misma que establece las especificaciones de protección ambiental para las actividades de exploración minera directa en zonas agrícolas, ganaderas o eriales y en zonas con climas secos y templados, en donde se desarrolle vegetación de matorral xerófilo, bosque tropical caducifolio, bosques de coníferas o encinos. De gran importancia, algo que en lo que se hizo mucho énfasis es el poder tener verdaderamente disponible y de forma asequible la información generada tanto por las instituciones como por las empresas mineras. En materia de leyes, se mencionó que deberá resolverse qué tiene la preeminencia, el artículo 4 constitucional o el artículo 6 de la ley minera. Esto, bueno, es materia de los expertos jurídicos, que por cierto, creo y considero que es necesario incorporarlos en los equipos interdisciplinarios técnicos para abordar de una forma integral la solución de esta problemática. No más ni menos importante es la contaminación del agua por la minería, ¿sí? En este caso tuvimos a Tania Mascarenjas Tavares de la Universidad Federal de la Bahía de Brasil y César Arturo Ilizaliturri Hernández de la Universidad Autónoma de San Luis Potosí. Tema totalmente trascendental, de gran controversia. La complejidad que se da en las interacciones ambiente-ser humano va mucho más allá de la suma de afectaciones al comportamiento de agua, suelo y aire, ya que todo está interrelacionado en los ecosistemas. Esta complejidad no ha sido aún vista y abordada por el marco regulatorio que existe en nuestro país, y mucho menos ha sido incluida en las políticas de desarrollo industrial y económico de la minería. La situación actual de la pandemia ha evidenciado que todo el capital económico puede pasar a un segundo o tercer plano si los controles biológicos naturales son rebasados en aras de un desarrollo económico sin consideraciones racionales por parte de lo que refiere a la parte ambiental. Está claro que la regulación actual ha quedado muy por debajo de los avances y conocimientos sobre ecología y salud humana. Es momento de reflexionar y hacer el cambio necesario de manera inteligente, integrada y cooperativa. Industria, sociedad, ciencia y normatividad. Y bueno, ¿qué podemos decir? Algo muy importante en el país y en cualquier lugar del mundo, los derechos humanos. Tuvimos entonces la mesa Minería, Derechos Humanos y Agua, donde participaron María Fernanda Paz Salinas del Centro Regional de Investigaciones Multidisciplinarias de la UNAM y Sol Pérez Jiménez, consultora de la UNAM. En este caso se presentó un estudio acerca de los impactos socioambientales de la actividad minera y sus efectos en el cumplimiento del derecho humano al agua. Posteriormente, se expuso un análisis sobre el uso del agua subterránea en la minería, su extracción en zonas con acuíferos sobreexplotados y con poblaciones sin acceso al agua. A manera de conclusión, se plantea que es innegable la afectación que la minería tiene sobre el entorno y la población, lo cual va en detrimento de la garantía de derechos para todos. Es necesario investigar de manera profunda e interdisciplinaria el tema, tomar decisiones basadas en evidencia científica e impulsar la ética como motor del ejercicio ciudadano de todos los actores involucrados. Pues bueno, entonces creo que la nueva realidad nos muestra que no se debe continuar haciendo grandes proyectos sin consultar y sobre todo consensuar con las poblaciones que resultarán afectadas, en la contradictoria creencia que serán poblaciones beneficiadas con estas obras. Por último, para hacer el cierre de esto, yo diría, el desafío central que enfrentaremos es entonces, ¿cómo armonizamos el innegable desarrollo económico que proporciona la actividad minera con la sustentabilidad ambiental, considerando en el centro al agua? Y la distribución equitativa de los beneficios generados entre los habitantes de una región, bajo el enfoque de una gestión integrada del agua y el territorio. Sin más, doy las gracias a todos por su participación. Y siendo las 6:45 de la tarde, me complace dar por concluidos los trabajos de este primer foro virtual de agua y minería en México. Desafíos para una gestión integrada de agua y territorio. En la seguridad, que será el primero de muchos otros eventos a realizar que nos permitan reflexionar en las soluciones necesarias para resolver la problemática en esta materia. Sin más, deseo a todos una muy linda tarde. Gracias por su atención.
Pues muchísimas gracias, Norma. De verdad, con esta precisa reseña que hiciste de esta jornada, pues damos por concluidos los trabajos de este primer foro virtual, esperando que nos veamos muy, muy pronto con todas y todos ustedes en otro espacio de conocimiento, siguiendo con este tema y con otros temas que son fundamentales para la gestión del agua y de los recursos naturales y del desarrollo en nuestro país. Muchísimas gracias a cada una y a cada uno de ustedes por su presencia, por su activa participación en este foro, por estar a lo largo de todo este tiempo, por permanecer aquí. Y también quiero agradecer muchísimo a todo el equipo de logística y de comunicación, todo el soporte y todo el trabajo que hay detrás de la organización de este evento. Les recordamos que pues estar al pendiente de los espacios de comunicación y de las redes, para que ahí vamos a estar publicando todo lo que aquí se generó, para que ustedes tengan acceso, como habíamos anunciado al inicio, pues de todo el material que se generó con la participación de nuestros ponentes y de todas y cada uno de ustedes. No nos resta más que desearles que tengan una feliz noche, una feliz tarde, y pedirles atentamente que nos sigamos cuidando ahí donde estemos, que nos sigamos cuidando en lo personal, que cuidemos a nuestros seres queridos, a los que están en el entorno inmediato, porque cuidándonos, cuidamos a los demás. Muchísimas gracias y nos vemos muy pronto en el próximo espacio de conocimiento. Hasta pronto.
Hasta pronto.
Muchas gracias a todas y todos.
Bye.